Megan Cole had never seen so many aliens in one place before, and the sight made her heart race with excitement as she walked through the crowded market district of Nexus Prime Station. The station hung in the darkness of space at the edge of the Orion Arm, serving as a massive trading hub where dozens of species came together to buy and sell and negotiate deals that shaped the economy of entire star systems. Megan was 17 years old, small for her age, with brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail and curious green eyes that tried to take in everything at once. Her father, Derek Cole, worked as a trade negotiator for the United Earth Commerce Division, and this was her first time joining him on an official mission beyond the solar system. Humans had only joined the Galactic Concord 3 years ago, and their presence in places like Nexus Prime was still rare enough to draw stares from the other species. Megan noticed how some of the aliens looked at her as she passed by their stalls and shops. A group of tall insectoid creatures chittered to each other and pointed at her with their segmented limbs. A pair of blue-skinned Villani merchants whispered behind their hands as she examined a display of glowing crystals. She knew what they were thinking, because she had read about it in the cultural briefings. Before the trip to most of the galaxy, humans were the newest addition to the spacefaring community, a young species from a world that many considered barely habitable. The Galactic Concord had classified Earth as a Class 7 world, which meant it had high gravity, an oxygen-rich atmosphere that most species found corrosive, extreme temperature variations, and native wildlife that had evolved through billions of years of brutal competition. But the aliens did not look at Megan and see a survivor of such a harsh world. They looked at her and saw a small, soft creature with no claws, no scales, no natural armor, no venom, and no obvious means of defense. They saw a child from a species that had only recently learned to travel between stars. They saw weakness. Megan did not mind the stares too much because she was too fascinated by everything around her to care. The market district stretched across 3 levels of the station, filled with shops and restaurants and entertainment venues that catered to every species imaginable. Strange smells drifted through the air, some pleasant and some decidedly not, and the sounds of 100 different languages created a constant background noise that her translator implants struggled to keep up with. Her father was attending meetings on the upper levels of the station, negotiating trade agreements that would open new markets for Earth goods. He had given her permission to explore the market district as long as she stayed in the public areas and kept her communicator active. Megan had promised to be careful, and she meant it. But she also wanted to see as much as possible before they had to leave. She wandered past a stall selling live creatures in floating bubbles, past a restaurant where the food seemed to be still moving on the plates, past a shop filled with weapons that hummed with energy she could not understand. The station was a marvel of engineering, built by the Villani centuries ago and expanded over time as more species joined the Concord. The ceilings were high enough to accommodate the tallest species, and the gravity was set to a standard that felt slightly light to Megan, like walking on a trampoline that had been pulled too tight. She liked the feeling because it made her steps feel bouncy and free as she turned down a narrower corridor that led toward a section of art galleries. Megan heard voices ahead that made her slow her pace. The voices were harsh and angry, speaking in a language her translator rendered as flat and threatening. She pressed herself against the wall and peeked around the corner, curious despite the warning bells going off in her head. 2 figures stood in the corridor ahead. One was a nervous-looking creature with pale gray skin and 4 arms, holding a small container that glowed with a faint purple light. The other was massive, nearly 7 feet tall, with dark green scales and yellow eyes that gleamed in the dim lighting of the corridor. Megan recognized the larger one as a Thalari from the briefings. She had studied. The Thalari were a reptilian species known throughout the galaxy for their strength and their aggressive temperament. They came from a low-gravity world with a thin atmosphere, and they had spread across dozens of systems as mercenaries and enforcers, and sometimes as legitimate security personnel. This particular Thulari was clearly not working in any legitimate capacity. Megan watched as he grabbed a container from the four-armed creature and examined its contents with obvious satisfaction. The smaller alien trembled as the Thulari spoke to him in low, threatening tones, and Megan did not need her translator to understand that this was some kind of illegal exchange. She should have left immediately, and she knew that her father had warned her about the seedier elements that existed on stations like this, and she had no business witnessing whatever criminal activity was happening in that corridor. But before she could move, the Thulari's head snapped toward her position with predatory speed. His yellow eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then the smaller alien took advantage of the distraction to scurry away, leaving Megan alone with the massive reptilian enforcer. His name was Varax, though Megan would not learn that until later, and he had been working for a smuggling ring that operated out of Nexus Prime for the past several cycles. He was wanted on multiple systems for assault and intimidation, and he had built his reputation on terrifying those who were smaller and weaker than himself. Looking at the small human girl who had just witnessed his transaction, Varax saw nothing but an easy problem to solve. He tucked the container into his belt and began walking toward her with slow, deliberate steps. His clawed feet clicked against the metal floor, and his lipless mouth curved into something that might have been a smile on a different face. Megan felt her heart pounding as she backed away, but the corridor behind her was long, and she knew she could not outrun those powerful legs. She reached for her communicator, but Varax made a warning sound deep in his throat. "I would not do that if I were you, little Earthborn," he said, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "We are going to have a conversation about what you saw and what you are going to forget." Megan's hand froze over her communicator as the Thulari enforcer closed the distance between them. She had never felt so small in her entire life, and she had no idea that the next few minutes would change everything the galaxy believed about her species. Varax stopped a few feet away from Megan and looked down at her with those cold yellow eyes that showed no emotion beyond mild annoyance. To him, she was nothing more than an inconvenience, a small creature from a backwater world that had stumbled into something she should not have seen. He had dealt with witnesses before, and they always responded the same way to a little intimidation, a few harsh words, maybe a display of strength, and they would scurry away and keep their mouths shut forever. Humans were new to the galactic stage, and everything Varax knew about them suggested they were soft and weak and easily frightened. "You saw nothing in that corridor," he said, his voice carrying the weight of countless threats delivered over the years. "You will walk away and forget this ever happened. And if you speak to anyone about what you think you witnessed, I will find you and make you regret it." Megan wanted to run, but her legs felt frozen in place. She wanted to scream, but her throat had gone dry. For all she could do was stare up at the massive reptilian figure that towered over her like a living nightmare. Varax tilted his head and studied her with growing irritation. Most beings would be trembling and begging by now, promising anything to be allowed to leave. This small human just stood there with her green eyes wide and her body rigid with tension. "Perhaps you do not understand the situation," Varax continued, taking another step closer. "Let me make it clearer for you." He reached down with one massive clawed hand and grabbed the collar of her jacket, intending to lift her off the ground and hold her at eye level. It was a move he had used many times before on smaller species, and it never failed to break their spirit when they found themselves dangling helplessly. In his grip, he pulled upward with enough force to lift a Villani twice her apparent size. Megan did not Varax blinked in confusion and pulled harder, his muscles straining against unexpected resistance. Human girl remained planted on the floor, as if her feet had been welded to the metal surface, for the first time in many years. Varax felt something he did not recognize immediately. Took him a moment to realize it was the beginning of uncertainty. What Varax did not know, what most of the galaxy did not know, was that humans were not the fragile creatures they appeared to be. Earth's gravity was nearly twice the galactic standard, and every human who grew up on that world developed bone density and muscle mass that would seem extraordinary to species from lighter worlds. Megan weighed far more than any being her size should weigh by galactic standards, and her muscles were anchored to bones that had grown strong under the constant pull of her homeworld. Station's standard gravity felt light to her, almost floaty, and her body was firmly planted against the floor with a stability that Varax had never encountered. He pulled again with both hands now, genuinely straining, and still she barely shifted. Megan's fear began to transform into something else as she felt the alien struggling to move. Her years of memories flashed through her mind in an instant. The self-defense classes her mother had insisted she take after a scare at school. The hours of practice learning to use an attacker's momentum against them. The instructor's voice telling her that size did not matter. When you knew where to strike, her body moved before her conscious mind could catch up. She grabbed Varax's arm with both hands, dropped her weight even lower, and twisted with all the strength her Earthborn muscles could produce. The sound that followed would haunt everyone who heard it. Varax's arm broke in 4 places, the bones snapping like dry branches under the torque of her rotation. He screamed in a pitch that seemed impossible for such a large creature, a sound of pure shock and agony that echoed through the corridor. His other arm swung toward her in a reflexive strike, claws extended, driven by pain and rage rather than thought. Megan ducked under the blow with reaction speed that her species had evolved over millions of years of dodging predators on a world where everything wanted to kill you. She came up inside his reach and drove her elbow into his throat with all the force of her terror and adrenaline. Human adrenaline was another thing the galaxy did not fully understand. When a human body perceived a threat to its survival, it flooded the system with chemicals that temporarily increased strength, speed, and pain tolerance to levels that would seem superhuman to outside observers. Megan was small, and she was scared, and she had never been in a real fight in her life. But in that moment, her body became a weapon forged by billions of years of evolution. On one of the harshest worlds in known space, her elbow crushed Varax's secondary respiratory canal, a vulnerable structure in Thalaria anatomy that most species did not even know existed. He staggered backward, clutching his throat with his unbroken arm, unable to draw breath properly. His yellow eyes were wide with something Megan had never expected to see in such a fearsome creature. Varax collapsed against the corridor wall and slid to the floor, his massive body convulsing as he struggled to breathe through his damaged airway. Purple blood seeped from his throat where internal structures had ruptured, and his broken arm hung at angles that made Megan's stomach turn. She stood over him, her hands shaking, her breath coming in rapid gasps, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She had not meant to hurt him this badly. She had just wanted to get away, to survive. To make him stop, the corridor seemed to spin around her as the adrenaline began to fade, and the reality of the situation crashed over her like a wave. Alarms began to sound somewhere in the distance, and she heard the pounding of feet approaching from multiple directions. Station security had detected the disturbance and was responding with impressive speed. Megan did not move from her spot as uniformed Valani officers rounded the corner and stopped dead at the scene. Before them they saw a notorious Thalarian enforcer lying on the low ground in critical condition, gasping for breath through a crushed throat, his arm shattered beyond recognition. and standing over him was a small human girl with brown hair and green eyes. Looking like she might collapse at any moment, one of the officers spoke into his communicator with a voice that shook slightly. "Medical team to Corridor 7 immediately. We have a Thalari down with severe injuries. And notify the human delegation that we have one of their citizens involved in an incident." Megan heard the words, but they seemed to come from very far away. All she could do was stare at her hands and wonder how something so small could have done something so devastating. She did not know it yet, but word of what happened in that corridor would spread across the station before the day was over, and the galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. The medical bay of Nexus Prime Station was equipped to handle injuries from over 60 different species. But the doctors working on Vorax had never seen damage quite like this. They rushed him into emergency surgery within minutes of his arrival, their instruments working frantically to repair the catastrophic trauma to his throat, and armed. The lead surgeon was a Vellani named Dorothy, who had practiced medicine for over 40 cycles and thought he had seen everything. He was wrong. The secondary respiratory canal is completely collapsed. Dorothy reported to his team as they worked. "I am seeing fractures in the surrounding cartilage structure that extend into the primary airway, and the nerve damage is extensive enough that we will need to install a temporary bypass just to keep him breathing." "What about the arm?" One of his assistants, Esketereth, brought up the scan on a floating display and shook his head in disbelief. 4 complete breaks, 2 of them compound, with fragmentation at each site that suggests rotational force beyond anything I would expect from a standard assault. Whoever did this either used a mechanical device or possesses strength far beyond normal parameters. "It was a human," another assistant said quietly. "A juvenile human female, according to the security report." Dorothy paused his work and looked at his colleague with an expression of confusion. "That cannot be correct. Humans are a Class 7 species, but their young are supposed to be even more fragile than their adults. There must be some mistake in the report." There was no mistake 2 levels above the medical bay. Derek Cole burst through the doors of the security headquarters with fear written across every line of his face. He had received a notification about his daughter's involvement in an incident and had immediately abandoned his trade meetings without explanation. Nothing in the galaxy mattered more to him than Megan's safety. Found her sitting in a small room with a thermal blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Looking smaller than he had ever seen here, a Vellani administrator named Counselor Tyrus sat across from her, asking questions in a gentle tone that seemed designed to avoid causing additional distress. "Megan." Derek rushed to his daughter and pulled her into a tight embrace. She buried her face against his chest, and he could feel her trembling. Though whether from fear or shock or something else he could not tell. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I did not mean to hurt him so badly. He grabbed me, and I just reacted. I did not know what was happening until it was over." Derek held her tighter and looked over at Counselor Tyrus with eyes that demanded answers. "What happened to my daughter?" Tyrus rose from her seat and gestured for Derek to join her by the display screen on the wall. "Perhaps you should see for yourself. Mr. Cole, we have security footage of the entire incident." They watched the recording together, and Derek felt his blood turn cold as he saw the massive Dalari enforcer corner his daughter in the corridor. Watched Vorax grab her collar and try to lift her. Watched the confusion on the alien's face when she did not move. Watched his daughter's body transform from a scared teenager into something else entirely. The speed of her counterattack was almost too fast for the camera to capture clearly. Had known about Megan's self-defense classes. Had even attended a few of her practice sessions over the years, but he had never imagined that the skills she learned would be used in a situation like this. The footage clearly shows that your daughter acted in self-defense. Tyrus said after the recording ended. The Thalari made first contact with aggressive intent, and your daughter responded to protect herself. There will be no charges filed against her. Is she hurt? Derek asked, still trying to process what he had seen. Physically, she's unharmed, Tyrus replied. But I am more concerned about the emotional impact of such a traumatic experience, and frankly, Mr. Cole, I am also deeply curious about how a juvenile human was able to inflict such devastating injuries on a fully grown Thalari enforcer. Derek closed his eyes and let out a long breath. You do not know much about humans yet, do you? What followed was an education that would eventually reach every corner of the Galactic Concord. Derek requested a remote consultation with a human medical expert from the Earth Embassy on a nearby station. And within an hour, a doctor named Patricia Vance was explaining human physiology to a room full of stunned alien officials. Earth is what we call a high-gravity world, Dr. Vance began, her image floating above the conference table. Our standard gravity is approximately 1.8 times the galactic average, which means that every human being develops bone density and muscle mass that would be considered exceptional by the standards of most spacefaring species. She brought up comparative data on the display. Human bones contain a calcium phosphate matrix that is significantly harder than the skeletal structures of species from lighter worlds. Our muscles are composed of fiber types that provide both explosive power and sustained endurance. And our connective tissues are reinforced to handle stresses that would tear apart less robust organisms. Counselor Tyrus leaned forward with obvious fascination. Are you saying that all humans possess this level of physical capability? To varying degrees, yes, Dr. Vance replied. But what happened in that corridor was not just about raw strength. It was about human neurochemistry, when a human perceives a threat to their survival. Our bodies release a cascade of hormones, including adrenaline and cortisol, that temporarily enhance our physical capabilities far beyond baseline levels. She paused to let that sink in. The girl you saw in that footage was not fighting with her normal strength. She was fighting with the strength of a terrified animal backed into a corner. An animal that evolved on a world where hesitation meant death and where our ancestors had to compete against predators many times their size just to survive. The room was silent for a long moment. One more thing you should understand. Vance continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone. Human children are not weaker versions of human adults in the way that seems to be common among other species. Our young develop much of their physical capability early in life, precisely because Earth is so dangerous. An 8-year-old human can already run faster and hit harder than most adult members of low-gravity species. By the time they reach adolescence, they are formidable by any galactic standard. She looked directly at Counselor Tyrus through the display. You grabbed a child from a world where the gravity wants to crush you, where the atmosphere is corrosive by your standards, where the weather can kill you in a dozen different ways, and where every living thing evolved through billions of years of brutal competition. That child may look small and soft to you, but she is a product of one of the harshest environments in known space. Dr. Vance's final words hung in the air like a verdict. What exactly did you expect to happen? Down in the medical bay, Varax emerged from surgery with his arm encased in a regeneration field and his throat reconstructed with synthetic tissues that would take months to fully integrate with his natural biology when the doctors told him he would be eating through a nutrient tube for the foreseeable future. He did not complain. He was too busy replaying the moment in his mind when a small human girl had looked up at him with terrified green eyes and then destroyed him without even trying for the first time in his life. Vorax understood what his victims had felt when they looked at him, and that understanding changed something inside him forever. News traveled fast on Nexus Prime Station, and news about the incident in Corridor 7 traveled faster than anything in recent memory. Within hours of the confrontation, Every species on the station was talking about what had happened between the Thulari enforcer and the human girl. The story spread through the market district like fire through dry grass, growing and changing slightly with each retelling, until multiple versions existed simultaneously. Some said the human girl had been armed with a hidden weapon. Some said she was actually an adult soldier disguised as a child. Some said she had used some kind of forbidden combat drug that enhanced her abilities beyond natural limits. But those who watched the security footage knew the truth. A small teenage girl from Earth had broken a Thulari enforcer in half using nothing but her bare hands and instincts. She was born with the smuggling ring that Varax worked for held an emergency meeting in one of their hidden safe houses to discuss how they should respond to the attack on one of their enforcers. The leader of the operation was a scarred Kethrani named Solvax, who had built his criminal empire on a foundation of violence and intimidation. We cannot let this insult go unanswered, one of his lieutenants argued. If word spreads that a human child hospitalized one of our people without consequences, we will look weak. Solvax drummed his clawed fingers on the table and considered the situation. Show me the footage again, he said. They watched it 3 times in complete silence. On the third viewing, Solvax paused the recording at the exact moment when Megan's hands closed around Varax's arm. He enhanced the image and studied the expression on her face. Look at her eyes, he said quietly. She is terrified. She has no idea what she is doing. This is not a trained fighter executing a practice technique. This is pure survival instinct that makes her less dangerous, not more, the lieutenant replied. No, Solvax shook his head slowly. That makes her more dangerous than anything we have ever faced. A trained fighter has limits. They know what they can and cannot do, and they operate within those boundaries. But this girl does not know her own capabilities. Her body simply reacted to a threat and produced that level of destruction without any conscious thought or control. He shut off the display and looked around the room at his assembled lieutenants. There are over 2,000 humans on this station right now, mostly traders and diplomats and their families. If we retaliate against this girl, how many of them do you think will decide that we are a threat to their people? Nobody answered. Varax made a mistake. Solvax continued. He saw something small and assumed it was weak. And now he is eating through a tube and will never fully recover. We will not make the same mistake. Spread the word to all of our people. The humans are not to be touched. Not the adults, not the children, not anyone. Is that understood? The message went out within the hour, and other criminal elements on the station received similar warnings from their own leadership. The balance of power on Nexus Prime had shifted in ways that nobody had anticipated. Meanwhile, Megan struggled to process what she had done. She sat in the quarters her father had rented for their stay on the station, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the wall without really seeing it. Derek sat beside her and waited for her to speak, knowing that she needed time to work through her thoughts before she could put them into words. I keep seeing his face, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. The moment when his arm broke, he looked at me like I was a monster, like I was something he could not comprehend, and maybe he was right. Megan, look at me, Derek said. Gently she turned to face him with eyes that were red from crying. You are not a monster, he told her firmly. You are a 17-year-old girl who was attacked by a criminal twice your size, and you defended yourself the only way you could. There is nothing monstrous about that. But I hurt him so badly, Megan replied. The doctor said he might never fully recover. His arm will always have weakness in it, and his throat will never work right again. I did that to another living being with my own hands. Derek pulled her into a hug and held her while she cried. I know this is hard, he said, and I wish I could tell you that the feelings will go away, but they probably never will completely. What I can tell you is that you had no choice. That creature was going to hurt you, or worse. And your body did what it needed to do to survive. A chime at the door interrupted them, and Derek reluctantly released his daughter to answer it. Counselor Tyrus stood in the corridor with a datapad in her hands and an expression of cautious sympathy on her face. "May I come in?" she asked. "I have some information that I thought you both should hear." She entered and sat across from Megan with the careful movements of someone approaching a frightened animal. "First, I want you to know that I have 2 children of my own," Tyrus began. "And if anything like this ever happened to them, I do not know how I would cope. So please believe me when I say that I understand how difficult this must be for you." Megan nodded but did not speak. "The Thalari you encountered. His name is Varax, and he has a history that I think you should know about," Tyrus continued. "He was wanted on 3 different systems for assault and intimidation charges, and his victims were always the same. Smaller species, people who could not fight back, people he could terrorize without any risk to himself." She pulled up records on her datapad and showed them to Megan. "A Villani merchant who refused to pay protection money and spent 2 months in medical recovery. A Solari family whose child was threatened until they agreed to transport illegal goods. A young Kethrani worker who witnessed something she should not have and was beaten so badly that she lost the use of one of her arms." Megan stared at the records with growing understanding. "These are just the cases that were officially reported," Tyrus said. "There are likely dozens more victims who were too afraid to come forward. Varax built his career on hurting those who could not defend themselves. Until now," Derek said quietly. "Until now," Tyrus agreed. "What you did in that corridor may have saved countless future victims from suffering at his hands. That does not make the experience any less traumatic for you. But I hope it provides some small comfort to know that your actions had meaning beyond just protecting yourself." Megan looked down at her hands, the same hands that had shattered bone and crushed cartilage. Without her conscious direction, for the first time since the incident, she felt something other than horror and guilt. She felt the smallest flicker of something that might have been acceptance. "There will be a formal hearing tomorrow," Tyrus said. "It is standard procedure for any incident involving violence on the station, but based on the evidence I have seen, I am confident that you will be cleared of any wrongdoing." She rose to leave, but paused at the door. "For what it is worth," she added, "I am glad it was you in that corridor, and not someone who could not have defended themselves. The galaxy is a little bit safer because of what you did, even if it does not feel that way right now." After she left, Megan sat in silence for a long time. Then she turned to her father with tears still wet on her cheeks. "Can we go home after the hearing?" she asked. "I want to go back to Earth." Derek took her hand in his and squeezed it gently. "Yes, sweetheart," he promised. "We will go home as soon as we can." The hearing took place in a formal chamber on the administrative level of Nexus Prime Station, where representatives from multiple species gathered to review the incident and render an official judgment. Megan sat at a small table with her father beside her, facing a panel of 5 adjudicators from different worlds who would decide whether her actions fell within the bounds of Galactic Concord law. Counselor Tyrus served as the presiding officer and opened the proceedings with a summary of the events that had occurred in Corridor 7. The security footage was displayed for everyone in the chamber, and Megan forced herself to watch, even though every second of it made her stomach turn when the recording ended. The adjudicators began their questions, most of them focused on technical details, like the exact sequence of events, whether Megan had attempted to flee before using force, and whether she had any prior training that might have influenced her. Response: Megan answered each question as honestly as she could, her voice steady even though her hands trembled beneath the table where nobody could see them. The Thalari adjudicator was the last to speak, and his presence had surprised everyone when he entered the chamber. His name was Ambassador Korath. and he had traveled from the Thalari diplomatic mission specifically to attend this hearing. "Young human," he said in a deep rumbling voice, "I have reviewed the evidence, and I have spoken with the medical staff treating Varax. And I have one question for you." Megan met his yellow eyes without flinching. "Though it took everything she had not to look away when you struck him," Karth continued, "were you trying to kill him?" The question hung in the air like a blade. "No," Megan replied. "I was just trying to make him let go of me. I did not know what I was doing. I did not know I could hurt anyone that badly. I just wanted to get away." Karth studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression that Megan could not quite read. "I believe you," he said finally. "And that is perhaps the most remarkable thing about this entire incident. You were not trying to destroy him. You were simply trying to survive. And that instinct alone was enough to leave a trained enforcer in critical condition." He turned to address the panel as a whole. "On behalf of the Thalari diplomatic mission, I hereby request that this young human be cleared of all wrongdoing under Article 7 of the Galactic Concord Self-Defense Statutes. Furthermore, I request that humans be formally reclassified from Category 3 developing species to Category 1 high-gravity apex origin in all official Concord documentation." Murmur rippled through the chamber at this unexpected development. "The Thalari have a saying," Karth continued, "that a warrior is defined not by the enemies they defeat, but by the battles they choose not to fight. Vorax chose to attack someone he believed was weak, and he learned too late that his judgment was catastrophically wrong. His shame belongs to him alone." The vote was unanimous in Megan's favor, as the hearing concluded and people began to file out of the chamber. Ambassador Karth approached Megan and her father with slow, deliberate steps. "I want you to know something," he said to Megan. "Varax will survive, and when he recovers enough to understand what happened to him, I will personally ensure that he faces justice for the crimes he committed against others. Your actions have set in motion a chain of events that will bring closure to many victims who never thought they would see it." "Thank you," Megan said. Unsure of what else to say, Karth inclined his head in a gesture of respect that surprised her. "No, young one, thank you. You have taught my people a valuable lesson about the dangers of assumption. I suspect that lesson will save lives on both our sides in the years to come." He turned and walked away, and Megan felt something loosen in her chest that she had not even realized was tight 1 week later. The Cole family prepared to depart Nexus Prime. Stationed on a transport that would take them back to Earthward of what had happened had spread far beyond the station itself. Carried by travelers and traders to dozens of worlds across the sector, the story had taken on a life of its own, growing into something that Megan barely recognized when she heard fragments of it from passing conversations. Some versions cast her as a hero who had stood up against tyranny. Others painted her as a warning about the dangers of underestimating humans. A few portrayed her as a symbol of everything Earth represented in the galaxy, small and unassuming but hiding strength that could reshape the balance of power. Megan did not feel like any of those things. She felt like a tired teenager who wanted to go home and sleep in her own bed and never think about Corridor 7 ever again. Before they boarded their transport, she visited the observation deck one last time to look out at the stars. The viewport stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a panoramic view of the void that surrounded the station. Megan stood there in silence, watching distant points of light that represented worlds she might never visit and species she might never meet. "Hello." She turned to find a small Volani child standing behind her, maybe 6 or 7 years old by human standards, with large, curious eyes and delicate features. "Hello," Megan replied, kneeling down to be closer to the child's eye level. "My mother says you come from Earth," the child said. "Is it true that everything on your world is trying to kill you?" Megan could not help but smile at the innocent directness of the question. "It is not that bad," she said. "You just learn to be careful. And you learn to protect the things that matter." The child considered this with obvious concentration. "My mother says humans are stronger than they look," the child continued. "She says we should not be afraid of you, but we should be respectful. Your mother sounds very wise." Megan replied. A Volani woman appeared at the edge of the observation deck and called for her child to come back before the little one scurried away. They looked at Megan one more time and smiled. "I hope you come back to visit someday," the child said. "I want to learn more about Earth." Then they were gone, and Megan was alone again with the STARS counselor. Tyrus arrived a few minutes later to see the Cole family off personally. She presented Megan with a small medallion made of a silver metal that gleamed in the ambient light of the station. "This is a Volani symbol," Tyrus explained. "It represents unexpected strength, the strength that comes from within rather than from size or weapons or anger. I think you embody that meaning perfectly." Megan accepted the gift with genuine gratitude and tucked it carefully into her pocket where she could feel its weight against her leg. "Thank you for everything," she said. "Thank you for changing how we see your species," Tyrus replied. "The galaxy has much to learn about humans, and I suspect the lessons will continue to surprise us for generations to come." As their shuttle departed and Nexus Prime Station grew smaller in the viewport behind them, Derek turned to his daughter with a question in his eyes. "Are you okay?" Megan thought about it for a long moment before answering. "I never want to hurt anyone again," she said finally. "But I know now that I can protect myself if I have to. And somehow that makes me feel less afraid of what is out there." She looked out at the infinite darkness filled with countless stars and worlds and possibilities. "I think I am going to be okay." Far behind them, in a medical ward on the station they had just left, Varax lay in his recovery bed and stared at the ceiling while a nurse attached his nutrient tube for another feeding. He did not resist or complain. He simply lay there with the memory of green eyes and small hands playing over and over in his mind. He had spent his entire adult life making others feel small and helpless and afraid, and in the space of a few heartbeats, a teenage girl from Earth had shown him exactly what that felt like. The tube delivered nutrients directly to his stomach because his throat was still too damaged to swallow solid food. And the doctor said it might be months before he could eat normally again. His arm ached constantly despite the painkillers, and the nerve damage meant he might never regain full strength in his grip. But the physical injuries were nothing compared to what had happened inside his head. Vorax had learned something in that corridor that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Never underestimate an Earthborn, not even the small ones, especially not the small ones.